Hey RV family, keep it tight. My name is J Morse, the review guy, reviewing music for the love of music, and I'm back again to bring you another video, and in this one I'm going to be covering the new Vader record entitled Solitude in Madness. This is the 12th studio-length album by the Polish death metal band Vader, easily regarded as one of the most influential and important death metal bands to come out of the 1980s. Although I do see Vader overlooked in the grand scheme of things by many people that aren't too familiar with the death metal genre and have only heard of the really big names, namely bands like Obituary, Morbid Angel, Death, Possessed. The latter of which, Death and Possessed, Vader was formed in the same year as them, but the reason that Vader isn't credited as being a pioneer of death metal is simply because when they first started they were more of a speed metal and more of a thrash metal band. But considering many of the roots of death metal came from that, the Motorhead influences were aplenty, and thrash metal was really having a big impact on death metal, becoming more and more thrash metal oriented in the mid to late 80s, I would say, especially in the riff department as well as some of the vocal department. Ever since formation, Vader has been consistently dropping record after record after record and pretty much continuing on a solid trajectory. I covered one of the singles from this record in a weekly track roundup not too long ago, and it got me pretty excited to know that they were dropping another record. This is a compact 11 tracks, 29 minutes, so they are opting for the shorter length that many early death metal bands did in the 80s and the 90s, which I think is to its credit, because death metal, if you don't add anything in, if it doesn't have technicality, if it doesn't have some sort of symphonic element or a blackened element, usually it's going to wear really thin if you drag out an album for 40-50 minutes worth of material, if not an hour. And I have to give it to Vader for this record. This is the best straight true blue death metal record that I've heard this entire year. Not the best death metal record I've heard this year, but certainly the best OG type death metal release. And also for their sound to be this untouched but this raw and aggressive still, it truly is a testament to how well they have lasted the test of time and how they do deserve more respect, especially nowadays. If you look at a lot of the death metal bands that are still around from the 80s and the 90s, few and far between are bands that are still sounding as great as they once were. Possessed last record was pretty good, I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it had the same grit and punch as their initial releases. Cannibal Corpse is still dropping records, but Cannibal Corpse is as meat and potatoes as ever, and even their sound has dulled over the years. We all know what Deicide did with their last record. It was a hot mess. Easily one of the worst in their entire career. And then you have Vader sitting at the end of the rainbow, coming out unscathed, smelling like roses, and their sound being completely untouched for the most part, still possessing an extreme level of tenacious energy, a lot of chemistry between the band members, and overall just a really rigid production style. It baffles me how this record can simultaneously sound like it was released in 1987 or something, but also seem like right now. They've really perfected a production style that sounds a lot like the old scene, but not too unlike the new scene that they sound stale. This record as a whole doesn't really have that much in the way of dynamics, and one could call it very meat and potatoes in the grand scheme of things, but Vader does the style so much justice, and that comes down to experience, that comes down to stability. I would much rather have a band do something really good over and over than have a turbulent style that is all over the place with sporadic releases that you never know if they're going to be hit or miss or not. And Vader definitely opts for the shorter track listing, the very buff and gruff type vocals. A lot of times you'll get different refrains that will carry a track, such as on the track Sanctification Denied near the latter half. None of these tracks really read to me as boring. Some of them can read a little bit ho-hum, but considering these tracks never breach 2 minutes, 3 minutes, it's very difficult for many of these tracks to become cumbersome. The amount of meat on the bones on this record is palpable. I really am enjoying the overall mixing on this record, the bass, the low end frequency sound of this whole thing, the rumbling drums, the gritty riffs, the slobbering vocals that don't seem to consume the mix so much as sit and accompany it in this massive dance, an extreme dance, a bloodbath dance. This record just piles on the entrails. It really does sound gory, and despite being this far into their career, the anger and the lyricism and the way that the vocals are delivered, it stays great. Just a very cohesive and consistent sound throughout, and Peter does an amazing job on the vocals. When it comes to rhythm guitar, when it comes to bass work, when it comes to drum work, this is an entirely new lineup coming from the past decade when they all joined in 2010 and 2011, Peter being the only member that is left in the band from the original lineup. And they literally have one of the shakiest lineups in death metal. They are not consistent on that front, but it really hasn't hurt them. And if anything, I would say that with Peter being a founding member and constantly having these new members come in, it lets their sound stay a lot like their old material, but there is always new influence and new inspiration coming from these new members, and I think that works in its favor quite a bit. Overall, I'm really loving this record. I think it's a great display, and even though it can be called meat and potatoes, that's not a bad thing when you're doing it this damn good. If you're a fan of kind of that old school death metal sound, but played in somewhat of a new school way, check it out. This record doesn't really go above and beyond with technicality. This is a very meaty, buff type release from one of the legends of the genre that deserve even more respect than they currently get. They're a titan, and they continue to prove that they are one of the longest lasting death metal bands that are not releasing duds, that are not being iffy, that are not being shaky and shifty when it comes to releases. I'm going to be giving this album an 8 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Vader record, Solitude and Madness? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss the record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is J Morse, the review guy, and I'm signing off saying,
maybe we could both